Plymouth Long Beach is a magnificent spit of sand that plays a critical role in protecting Plymouth's inner harbor and the town of Plymouth. Formed from rock and land deposited by the Laurentide ice sheet of the last great ice age, this ancient, fragile barrier beach is approximately 3 miles long. With its base located at the mouth of the Eel River, the narrow beach runs from southeast to northwest to its tip at the entrance to Plymouth Harbor. Surrounding the coastal sand dunes running along its center is a magnificent coastal beach with wide tidal flats on Plymouth Bay. On the lee side of the beach along Plymouth Harbor are vital salt marshes and mudflats. This ecological diversity contributes greatly to Plymouth Long Beach's richness as a critical resource for plants, fish, shellfish, crustaceans, birds, and for humans. We all love the beach. Each year, Plymouth's Long Beach is visited by thousands of beachgoers. We come to walk, swim, run, birdwatch, scuba dive, and fish. For coastal residents and tourists, it is the place for families to relax and just enjoy the shore. It is also a temporary home for up to 20,000 migratory shorebirds that use the beach as a critically important fuel stop before continuing their long-distance migrations throughout the hemisphere. Even more importantly, Plymouth Long Beach is a breeding and nesting site for several threatened and endangered coastal birds. Nowhere else in the region, other than Monomoy Island off Chatham, can one find so many species of nesting shorebirds. Here you will find the endangered and federally protected piping plover and roseate tern, the state-protected least tern, common tern, and Arctic tern. Also, you'll find black skimmers, laughing gulls, willets, and probably an American oystercatcher pair. My love for Plymouth Beach began 25 years ago when I served as a tern warden for Mass Audubon. Over the years, I've spent hundreds of days monitoring wildlife on the beach and have worked with many others to help develop a delicate balance between the wildlife that needs the beach for its survival and we humans who want to enjoy the shore. This introduction to the nature of Plymouth Long Beach is a first in an ongoing series that explores this natural wonder. Barrier beaches such as Plymouth Long Beach are thin, delicate spits of sand. They are a highly dynamic landform, constantly forming and reshaping with storms and the tides, slowly migrating toward the mainland. Following their primal instincts, shorebirds, like piping plovers, lay their eggs in open sandy areas. The eggs and young are hard to detect by predators and humans alike, naturally camouflaged to blend in with the beach environment. In response to an alarming loss of species to extinction and to sustain our natural environment, Congress in 1973 passed the Endangered Species Act to protect rare species and the ecosystems upon which they depend. This has been a success story in part, with recovery of such endangered species as the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon. With increased protections afforded under the Endangered Species Act, bald eagles increased from 400 pairs in the 1960s to nearly 9,000 pairs in the lower 48 states today. With well-deserved fanfare, our national bird was removed from the endangered species list in 2007. Another critically endangered species, the peregrine falcon, was officially delisted in 1999. One veteran of the Federal Endangered Species Act is the piping plover, North America's most endangered breeding shorebird. This year marks the 25th anniversary for protection of this small beach-loving shorebird. While the number of nesting pairs has increased significantly, the piping plover still remains threatened and is not likely to be removed from the endangered species list anytime soon. Why is the protection of piping plovers so vital? The plover is a prime indicator of the health of our beaches. Protection of piping plovers benefits many other species, as well as the coastal processes that create and sustain our beaches. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Piping Plover Recovery Plan warns, the piping plover is an indicator of an entire ecosystem in very serious trouble. With increased legal protections, the plover has a unique role as a critically important umbrella species for many of these same fauna and flora. Protection of piping plovers is a matter of numbers. 25 years ago, there were 790 pairs of piping plovers on the Atlantic coast, from Newfoundland to North Carolina. During the 2010 breeding season, there were just over 1,800 pairs. It's a total not only short of the recovery goal of 2,000 pairs, but one that has increased very little in the last 10 years. To achieve the federal recovery goal and remove the Atlantic coast piping plover from the U.S. endangered species list, 2,000 pairs of plovers must be sustained for 5 consecutive years, with the total number of breeding pairs producing an average of 1.5 chicks per year. Given the slowed recovery rate of recent years, it could take decades to achieve 2,000 pairs. In only 1 year in the last 25 years, in 1994, has the average number of chicks surviving per nest achieved the goal of 1.5. To fully appreciate Plymouth Long Beach, we need first to understand the critical role and fragile nature of the piping plover as an umbrella species. We need to understand its habitat and nesting habits. This is actually, I would say, perfect piping plover nesting habitat. It's about as good as it gets. Piping plovers don't like vegetation. They prefer open, bare areas, and they prefer areas with stones and shells and things like that to break up the surface, making it very, very difficult to see the eggs. The eggs look like little stones, and so they love places like this where you have fine sand and a whole arrangement of stones, different sizes, different colors. The trick to finding them is usually following their tracks. And it's like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. As you get closer to the nest, which is at the hub of the wheel, you see the tracks increasing and going in the same direction toward the center, which is where the nest is. These shorebirds have specific critical needs in the ecosystem that determine precisely where they nest on the beach. Piping plovers, least terns, Arctic terns, black skimmers, and the American oystercatcher prefer to nest on the flat beach where there is little or no vegetation. The eggs and hatched chicks are nearly invisible. They are camouflaged from detection, blending in perfectly with sand and small stones, but still often in harm's way of ORV beach users trying to get closer to the water. Roseate terns, common terns, and laughing gulls nest in the areas of beach grass among the dunes. The nests of all of these species range from nothing more than a simple depression in the sand to a more formal nest that may include small bits of shell, stone, or grass. Here at the end of May, the least terns are settling in on the open areas of the beach. They only nest in areas where there's almost no vegetation. They look for the broad, flat areas between the high tide line and the toe of the dune, primarily. They have a tendency to nest very close to the high tide line, and so through any particular year, it's likely they'll lose some of those nests, or maybe even all of them, to high tides, storms, and things like that. Nesting out in the open is beneficial and will help them increase their population. It's really important that they have that area, which is what would be called prime beach blanket zone, between the high tide line and the toe of the dune. So whenever we do have them, they're a state-listed species. They must be protected from disturbance. Areas have to be roped. In the case of piping plovers, the male, following its instinctive ritual, digs several scrapes in the sand no bigger than a hockey puck. These scrapes are the pair's potential nest sites. Next, the female selects the scrape of her particular liking and then lays her eggs. It takes them a day or so, day and a half, to lay an egg and to produce the second egg, the third egg, the fourth egg. So in 7 days or 8 days, they produce 4 eggs. Once the 4 eggs are there, that's when they begin to sit on the eggs. They don't sit on the eggs the first week. So the eggs are just sort of static. On the 8th day, they sit on the eggs and the whole process starts of growth. This is to ensure that all 4 eggs hatch the same day. Here's a spot where the male's digging a nest for the female, and as you can see, it's outside the roping that's been put up by the town. So it's in fact vulnerable. If the birds happen to lay an egg, it's vulnerable to being destroyed. So here we have a piping plover nest that almost got washed out by high tide. The tide on one of the moon tides, a high tide of 12 feet, came up to this point right here. The water literally probably even went into the eggs, but didn't harm them because it was just such a brief period of time. But piping plovers have adapted to nest as close to the high tide line as possible to have their eggs out here in the open where they're camouflaged, rather than up in the dune grass where the predators and stuff lurk that might catch them. So anyway, this nest here has 4 eggs. It's a full clutch, and it'll hatch 26 days after it's laid.
Extensive beach monitoring is critical for the survival of piping plover nests and chicks. Unless monitored very closely, eggs on the open beach are vulnerable to being stepped on, driven on, and are at the mercy of predators. Predators are often attracted in greater numbers to refuse left on the beach by ORV beach users and other beachgoers. Adult plovers and just hatched chicks are also in danger of being chased from the nest when disturbed by predators and beachgoers.
It's just before Memorial Day weekend, Friday, and we have a nice view of a predator exclosure up here. A predator exclosure is what it sounds like. It's a fence that excludes predators from a piping plover nest. So we have a piping plover nest of 4 eggs inside that little 10-foot wide fenced area. The exclosure has bird netting on top to prevent any crows or anything like that from getting in on the top. So they're relatively effective in protecting the eggs of the piping plover. Predator exclosures have a mesh size on the fencing that's 4 inches by 2 inches. Just the right size for a piping plover, which is about 4 or 5 inches tall, to sort of duck its head and walk right through the hole so it can go to and from its nest. The exclosure goes up after 4 eggs are laid, which is a week of the piping plovers caring for their eggs. After a week, the birds are very attached to the nest, so even when there's a fence put up around it, they have no problem going in and out to the eggs without any fear or anything like that. So this method has been used for almost 25 years to boost the hatching success of piping plovers. They're exactly the color of dry beach sand. So in a way, they're not only protecting themselves when they're sitting vulnerably near the dunes where there could be a predator, but they're also protecting the nest by shielding the eggs with their sand-colored body.
In the past, predators like coyotes and fox survived in balance with beach bird populations. Recently, however, the number of predators has increased when beachgoers leave even small amounts of scraps of food and other refuse on the beach that attract them. Our annual use of the beach increases dramatically from Memorial Day to Labor Day. The sometimes overnight presence of large numbers of ORVs and sudden crowds of people coming to the beach are a change that may have dramatic impact on the birds.
I think everyone who goes to the beach cares about the beach. We rope off the areas on the beach so that the birds have just the amount of space they need to successfully nest and raise their young. The roped areas are the single most important thing we do out there to protect the birds on their nests. It's not 100% foolproof. The program to protect these endangered birds has never been about access. It's about protecting the birds so that they can survive. Access is available on these beaches. Only the minimum amount that the birds need is roped off and protected for them.
Prior to Memorial Day weekend, the birds have settled peacefully into their nesting areas on quiet portions of the beach. Most plover parents have gone through courtship and laid their eggs. In some cases, their 2-inch tall chicks have hatched. Then Memorial Day weekend arrives, and from the bird's point of view, the floodgate opens. Beachgoers who arrive in ORVs typically want access to the very areas where these birds have traditionally nested during the first crucial weeks of these birds' survival. From Memorial Day to Labor Day, the Plymouth Long Beach Management Plan permits up to 225 ORVs to drive and park north of the town beach parking lot along the ORV trail, as well as along the 1.5 miles of the prime plover and tern nesting habitat on the beach.
All in all, the roped areas have been highly successful. Generally speaking, the birds nest inside the ropes. The public understands this. They follow this every year. However, there are some problems occasionally. Sometimes the birds nest outside the roped areas, and that needs to be discovered and re-roped. But also, what the public doesn't know is that when the piping plover chicks hatch, they do not see the ropes. They go outside the ropes, and piping plover chicks can be anywhere on the beach, from the dunes to the water.
Even when this nesting area is closed to vehicles,
Up to 193 ORVs are still allowed to drive and park on 1.5 miles of Plymouth Long Beach. We're looking from the oil dripping on the beach just from one car that's been out here today. We know there's only one car. That one vehicle has oil dripping on the beach all the way out and all the way back, and it really is quite a lot. And just think about hundreds and hundreds of cars, you know, maybe in this case 225 cars in one day on the beach, and over all the period of time in the summer. That's a lot of oil dripping on the beach. In fact, all of Plymouth Long Beach's entire 3-mile length is open to beachgoers year-round, many of whom access the beach on foot from the parking lot, by off-road vehicles along Ryder Way, and by boat along the beach's entire 3-mile length. As our enjoyment of beaches and the natural qualities that attract us to them increases every year, it's critical that we all take steps to ensure that we minimize our impacts to these resources, or we will lose the very thing we love. I think everybody who goes to the beach cares about the beach and enjoys the nature that's on the beach as well. They don't understand sometimes the damage that might occur from driving on the beach at certain times of year. Public awareness is vital to the protection of piping plovers and other beach nesting birds. Understanding the role of these birds as a gauge in the health of the beach is essential. In 1865, public attention was first drawn to the piping plover when Henry David Thoreau wrote in his classic work, Cape Cod, "If I were required to name a sound, the remembrance of which most perfectly revives the impression which the beach has made, it would be the peep of the plover." The next time you hear the peep of the plover, perhaps you might now have a better understanding of endangered shorebirds, the realities of their decline, and an essential ongoing effort to protect these species.